All right, welcome everyone to the Lemon Project's Porch Talk entitled De-Immortalizing William and Mary, a conversation with the Committee for Contextualization of Campus Landmarks and Iconography. I first want to just again say welcome. I'd like to encourage anyone, if you have questions throughout our student presentations, to please ask them in the chat, because hopefully we will have time for a Q&A at the end of our presentation. I also just want to confirm that everyone can see the presentation on their screen. And so before I turn to our student leaders, L'Oreal and Abby, the director of the Lemon Project, Jody Allen, will read the statements on enslavement at William and Mary and our land acknowledgement.
Okay.
Thank you, Jody.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to read the land acknowledgement statement first. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of our lands our campus is on today: the Cherahaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansman, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and the Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. This acknowledgement of slavery and its legacy statement. The Board of Visitors acknowledges that William and Mary enslaved people, exploited them and their labor, and perpetuated the legacies of racial discrimination. The board profoundly regrets these activities, apologizes for them, expresses its deep appreciation for the contributions made by the African and African American members of its community to the vitality of William and Mary then, now, and for all time coming, and commits to continue our efforts to remedy the lingering effects of past injustices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. I want to first introduce the fearless leaders of the Committee for Contextualization of Campus Landmarks and Iconography, which we have shortened to CCL&I, so that we don't always have to say all of those words all the time. So if you hear that acronym, that's what it stands for. But I want to turn our attention to L'Oreal Boulden and Abby Comey, who have spearheaded this project this year and really made it what it is today. They're going to talk a little bit about what the project is, how it got started, and then the current committee members are going to give some brief presentations on where their research is at for some of the campus landmarks that they are working on today. So I will turn it over to our leaders, L'Oreal and Abby.
Thank you so much, Molly. I'm Abby Comey. I'm a senior at William & Mary, and I'm studying English and Religious Studies. And I first became involved with CCL&I last fall as a member of the Lemon Project. I found out about it.
Hi, I'm L'Oreal Boulden. I'm a junior majoring in history. I found out about CCL&I in the same way that Abby did. We were both on the Lemon Project, and we joined this committee. Shane reached out and started it, and here we are.
So let's get started with the presentation. First, who exactly are we? We are a group of undergraduate students working under Student Assembly's The Plan to address the legacy of racism at William and Mary. So we're not actually under the Lemon Project. We are one of 5 committees that are part of the plan. Each different committee is tasked with addressing a different facet of the legacy and current racism at William and Mary. We meet every other Monday on the 3rd floor of SWEM. There are about 10 total members of our committee, and we talk about our research and work together to research different sites around campus. So the members of our committee are all undergraduate students, but they come from a range of social classes and a range of majors and a range of backgrounds. So anyone can be part of the committee who's interested. There are no real qualifications needed. And the committee was first founded by Shane Moran, who graduated last year. This was his idea. He sort of made the outline for the project, the outline for what the research would look like. So we're really, really thankful to Shane, who first sort of brought this idea into the world.
So our mission is to research and contextualize the buildings and landmarks on campus in order to provide the public with a full and unbiased history of these figures. So we have done all of our research and we want to make it accessible to the public for everybody to see, to get a full range of history of all the figures that are so celebrated on this campus with buildings and statues, etc.
So the way that our research works is that each member of the committee is assigned a different site on campus. So that's either a building or a statue, or in some cases, the Tyler Garden on campus, or the President's House or the Brafferton. Everyone has a site and a figure that they are researching. And so to give you a brief overview of sort of the cornerstones of our research, first is primary sources. There are a lot of secondary sources out there about these figures, particularly if you're working with someone like Thomas Jefferson or someone like George Washington. There's so much literature, but we're really trying to look at primary sources. So things like letters, things like public records, things like journal entries, things like interviews. That's what's most important to us. The second thing that's important to us as researchers is creating really detailed bibliographies. So every member of our committee has an annotated bibliography that's paired with their research, where they not only present their sources, but they say, where did this source come from? How reliable is it? And what did I actually use it for? So the bibliographies are really important to us. And then finally, we rely a lot on peer editing. So in addition to being assigned to a site, every member of the committee is assigned to a site that they're going to, or another person's research that they're going to review. So we all are constantly reading each other's work, discussing the work, discussing how reliable the sources are, and how clearly the information is presented. And this is something I just briefly wanted to touch on. This is a big campus, and there are a lot of people working on researching the history of slavery at William & Mary, researching different buildings, researching their namesakes. And so as we've been working as a committee to make contextualization happen, contextualization has already been happening around us. So recently, Special Collections has launched a project in the Wren building in the President's Hall, which used to be filled with a portrait of every president of William & Mary. They've taken down those portraits and sort of reimagined that space. So now there's different portraits of people who are just important figures in William & Mary's history. And every single one of those portraits in the portrait gallery is now contextualized with a little sign and a QR code. So that's wonderful, and we're really glad that that's happening. And then the second picture on the right is a plaque that's now on the front of Ewell Hall. So this work has sort of been done for us. This is what we envisioned, was having QR codes on the front of every building and statue on campus. So this plaque, you can't really read it, but it says sort of who Ewell is, why he's so important to William & Mary's history. And it also says that he was a slave owner. It says that he fought for the Confederacy. And it provides QR codes that link to further information. So we just wanted to acknowledge that contextualization is already going on campus. We're really happy about it. We're really excited about it. But we want to, as a committee, just continue that momentum.
Yes, so our goals when we first started this out, we set out to have, which we do now, a website where you can see all of our research, all of our sources, everything is accessible to everyone. You can go on there and see it. We have a social media account now. You can follow us on Instagram at Contextualization WM. Like Abby said, we want to have QR codes like you saw for Ewell, for every building, for every statue that you can access and go and see the entire history of who that person was, what that building stood for, that statue came from. And hopefully, fingers crossed, in the near future, we can have a living museum where people can come talk to you face to face and tell you about what exactly is going on, what information we have, and what research we've come up with.
Thank you for that wonderful overview of all of the CCL&I's work to give us a little contextualization for how the committee came about. So now we will turn to our brief student presentations. I'll be introducing them. Each student is going to talk about their research and the specific figure and landmark that they have been working on. And our first is Abby's work on Ewell Hall.
I did my research on Benjamin Stoddert Ewell and Ewell Hall. I wanted to work on Ewell Hall because I'm really involved in the music department at William & Mary. I take voice lessons, I'm president of the Botetourt Chamber Singers, and I go into Ewell pretty much every day. But before being part of the committee, I never knew anything about the history of the building or the biography of its namesake, and now I finally do. So I used a range of sources to study Ewell. As a starting point, I used a PhD dissertation by Anne Chapman from 1984, and it's pretty much the most comprehensive biography of Ewell in circulation, but it's just a dissertation, and I wasn't able to trace back a lot of the sources because not a lot of them have been digitized, and this dissertation is from the 80s, so I really just used that as a sort of starting point and overview. I don't really cite it in my bibliography. So for primary sources, which I relied on a lot more heavily, I studied a number of letters and personal records from SWEM Special Collections. SWEM Special Collections was just a trove of rich information for us, for everyone, all the people who worked in the committee. And those were definitely the most helpful and reliable pieces of information. And then to understand current student attitudes toward Ewell, I looked at local news stories, social media posts, and online petitions, because it's really important to our committee that we not only understand the history of these buildings and spaces, but that we understand what the current community attitudes are. So who is Benjamin Stoddert Ewell? Well, he was the grandson of the first US Navy Secretary, Benjamin Stoddert. He was born in 1810. Following in his grandfather's footsteps, military service really defined Ewell's education and career. He graduated from West Point in 1832 and went on to become a professor of both military science and mathematics. Ewell was president of William & Mary off and on from 1854 to 1888, so a very long period of time he was affiliated with the college. And he's most famous for trying to keep the college open despite the tremendous obstacles posed by the Civil War. He used his own money to keep the school running, and famously, he rang the Wren bells every morning to signal the continued life force of William & Mary. And that image has been really lasting of him ringing those bells. So Ewell Hall, the building, was formerly Phi Beta Kappa Hall, and it was named in Ewell's honor in 1957. The building is home to the Arts and Sciences Office, the Music Library, and the Music Department. It honors a president who got William & Mary through a time of tremendous uncertainty, but it also honors a man who owned slaves and who fought for the Confederacy. The wealth that Ewell dipped into to save William & Mary came from Ewell Plantation, where enslaved Black men and women labored inside the plantation house and outside in the fields. And the political sway that Ewell exercised to keep the school open came from his clout as a Confederate colonel. Although initially opposed to secession, Ewell impressed enslaved Virginians into his forces once the war reached the Commonwealth. In 1862, he asked former William & Mary faculty member Edward S. Joines to urge Secretary of War Judah P. Benjamin to send 1,500 enslaved men to Williamsburg from the surrounding counties. That same year, Ewell established the Williamsburg Line of Confederate Defense across the Virginia Peninsula, and later in the war, he served alongside his brother Richard Ewell, a senior officer under Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. It was only after the war that Ewell's loyalty swung to the side of the Union again as he begged Northern congressmen for money to support the college. So the bottom line is that Ewell was a slave owner who helped lead the Confederacy. All his efforts to keep the college running during and after the Civil War are tainted by that disturbing reality, and no amount of bell ringing can unring Ewell's racism. Today, William & Mary students are finally de-immortalizing this godlike figure in their school's history. In the spring of 2020, a petition to rename Ewell Hall collected over 6,000 signatures. But today, despite widespread student outrage, the name still stands, the bell still tolls. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Next, we'll turn to our committee member, Julian Allison, who will be talking about Blair statue.
Yes. Hi, I'm Julian. I'm a junior, and I was really interested in James Blair, the statue, and as a person, because as a history major, I spent a lot of time in Blair Hall. I know L'Oreal is going to cover that, and we both have the same interests. So I ended up on the statue, and he's just a very important person to William & Mary. And I found I didn't know a lot about him and his legacy. So I was really interested in researching that. And for my research, I started off really relying on a 1950s dissertation about Blair and a 1901 biography written. These are the two really comprehensive secondary sources. And they led me to a lot of House of Burgesses documents, the Virginia House of Burgesses, and personal documents of Blair that really helped build out my research. So to begin, During William Mary's tercentenary celebration in 1993, the school installed the James Blair statue, pictured here. It stands between Blair and Chancellor's Halls and faces the sunken gardens. Sculpted by the art professor Lewis Cohen, and served as a main part of the 300th anniversary celebration and was mentioned in Prince Charles's statements during that celebration. However, the story we are told of Blair while at the college neglects several integral parts of his story. James Blair, the credited founder of William and Mary and our first president of the college, was vastly successful throughout his lifetime, not only founding the college, but becoming the commissary of Virginia for the Anglican Church, and even becoming the acting governor of Virginia towards the end of his life. Yet, according to my research, in pursuit of these titles and the power they bestowed, Blair used cruel Machiavellian methods, making enemies of former friends wherever he met. Blair was born in Scotland sometime in the mid-1600s, and some estimates have it in 1655, some 1656, so around then. But he came to Virginia to serve as the rector for the Henrico Parish in 1685, eventually becoming commissary in 1689. It was in this year that he also began working towards creating a school for higher education in Virginia. Between 1690 and 1693, Blair worked tirelessly to acquire funding for the school, convincing private donors in England, the Virginia House of Burgesses, and even the King and Queen themselves. Notably, one of the sources of funding for the school came from the estate of Robert Boyle, an English scientist, and it was acquired for the, quote, express purposes of converting native infidels. This idea of converting Native Americans to Christianity was etched into the charter signed by King William and Queen Mary, stating the Christian faith may be propagated amongst the Western Indians. In pursuit of this conversion, Blair would make some powerful enemies in Virginia. In order to be paid money from the Boyle Fund, Blair had to provide the number and names of Native children attending the college for conversion, yet no neighboring tribe would willingly send its children to the school. So Blair decided to enslave the neighboring tribes and force their children into the school, being paid 14 pounds per annum for each child. This tactic drew ire from Francis Nicholson, who was a Virginia statesman at the time, and was one of the sources for the souring of their initial friendship into a bitter feud. Blair's relationship with slavery in the college does not end with the native tribes. Blair is credited with loaning the first 2 enslaved people to the college, and when he died, left the remainder of the people he personally enslaved to the college. In crafting a charter for the funding of William and Mary, Blair and the Royals made sure to include that the money would come from a penny per pound of tobacco from neighboring plantations. He not only utilized slavery during the formation of the college and his years as president, but he introduced the concept to William and Mary. Moreover, it was James Blair who convinced the Church of England to adopt the practice of slavery in the colonies. He believed that allowing ministers to enslave people would quote, be a most effectual expedient for furnishing this country with a learned, pious, and diligent clergy, and for rewarding such a clergy with all suitable encouragements in securing them in possession and enjoyment of them. James Blair was a man largely disliked by many of his contemporaries. He is behind the ousting of 3 colonial governors of Virginia, including his former friend Alexander Spotswood, as well as making an enemy of his other friend, the aforementioned Francis Nicholson. He adopted abhorrent measures that were extreme even for the time he lived, especially that of enslaving natives. It seemed that even professors at his college saw nefarious intent behind its actions, the further attainment of wealth and power. Nearly every source written about Blair remarks on his masterful pursuit of wealth. In fact, there were early complaints during the building of William and Mary about Blair receiving his salary as a president before the college had even been constructed. Professor Mongo Inglis, who was the leading master of the school at the time, remarked that Blair was using the school as, quote, a tool with which to enrich himself. James Blair may have achieved many great heights, including pushing for the founding of William and Mary and establishing it as a great institution during his presidency. Yet the credit for the college lay not with Blair alone. Since before Blair was even born, the idea for a college in Virginia was being tossed around the House of Burgesses, with the earliest record of which being in 1610. Moreover, Blair's expressed intent in creating the college did not match that of those who had originally had proposed the idea, nor of what we do today, which is the education of youth. He intended to use the college to increase the ministry of the Anglican Church in Virginia, as well as spread Christianity to unwilling native tribes. Blair was only able to achieve funds for the college through enslaving individuals, and it was only built through the hard labor of those he enslaved. Today, we venerate James Blair, name buildings after him, and even build a statue commemorating this college's 300th anniversary. Yet we must not forget the horrendous methods Blair used to create the college, which leave a stain on his already tainted legacy and the legacy of William and Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Continuing to talk about James Blair's legacy, we have co-chair L'Oreal talking about James Blair Hall.
Yes. So I did my research on James Blair Hall, which is a 3-story building that houses the history department here at William and Mary. So like Julian said, as a history major and also a student worker for the department, I spent a majority of my college career in this building, walking along James Blair Drive and passing that James Blair statue. And I still didn't know who exactly he was outside of being the founder of the college. But thanks to Julian, we now have a lot more context on who he was. So Blair Hall was originally built in 1935, and it was originally named Marshall Wythe Hall. It wasn't until 1968 when the law school was relocated and they took the name Marshall Wythe with them, and the building was renamed to James Blair Hall. So within my research, I used both primary and secondary sources to gather as much information possible on Blair and on the building. But I want to discuss a specific primary source because I don't want to give you another history lesson on who James Blair was. So I'm going to talk about this primary source, which is the first written record of an enslaved person on campus. I feel like this resource truly attests to who Blair was, how the students of the college operated, and how enslaved people were treated during this time. So the document is an affidavit written by Blair himself on May 1st, 1702. To provide a bit of context, there was a longstanding tradition of students barricading themselves within their dorms before Christmas break until the break was officially started. But this year, Blair was not having it and called, as he wrote, for a Negro man and a white servant to come break down this barricade. After the Negro man broke down the barricade, he was shot and injured by the student. This would only be the beginning of the blatant mistreatment of Black workers on this campus, Black enslaved workers, and we can still see the mistreatment of Black workers on this campus today. To hear a story of how a person who looked like me was treated so disposably by both the student and the president of this college speaks volumes. And I hope this story and instances like it are not forgotten or hidden when we talk about the history of the college. I know at times we want to ignore these disappointing parts of history, but we have to acknowledge them in order to move on. And that is what our research is for. That is why our committee has been started. And that is why I've done this research. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, L'Oreal. Next up, talking about the President's House, we have Cecilia Weaver.
Hi, I'm Cecilia. I'm a sophomore here at William & Mary, and I'm a history and government double major. And this is actually my first semester in this committee. So my research is very much still ongoing, but I want to provide you with some of what I found so far. So the President's House is and I was interested in the President's House because it's something that's like a little bit mysterious to students. Like we've seen the inside from President Roe's Zoom calls, but we're not really sure what goes on in there, even though it's a place that we walk past almost every single day. So it's one of 3 buildings on historic campus and was constructed in 1732. Before 1732, the president of the college, James Blair, lived in the east wing of the Wren building. And because he was the first president and it was constructed while he was president, it has been the official residence for every president at William & Mary, though through my research, it's been unclear whether every president lived there, and there were definitely presidents who were living in different places during times when the house is being refurbished or reconstructed. So besides the presidents themselves, the structure is also involved in major events throughout American history. It partially burned in 1781 during the American Revolution while it was occupied by French troops. And French King Louis XVI was the one who paid for the repairs to the president's house. So that provides another connection between William & Mary and a European monarchy, in addition to its connection to William & Mary themselves, which has an interesting legacy as its place as a college building and its connection to that kind of wealth. And then during the Civil War, the president's house was also part of Union troops' use of old campus as headquarters and was part of their fortifications and used during the Civil War. So back to how the president's house was constructed, as was the case with most of the buildings on a historic campus, enslaved people were involved in its construction, and Henry Carey was the person who was in charge of the planning and things with the house. It is possible, and this is something that I'm looking into, that enslaved people lived in the president's house. I haven't found specific records on this, and I don't know if I ever will. But it's interesting to consider whether or not enslaved people who were owned by several early presidents of the college, including James Blair, as was discussed earlier, might have lived in this home alongside the presidents, or if they were living in the Red Building, which we know was a slave quarter at William and Mary. It's also interesting because the president's house carries a legacy of Rockefeller and the reconstruction of colonial Williamsburg, because it was restored during the time when Rockefeller was restoring colonial Williamsburg back to its more original appearance in the 1700s. So it has to deal with that legacy of creating this idyllic American past that celebrated sort of this perfect America and nationalism, rather than dealing with some of the harsher realities of history. So as the president's private residence, the president's house also faces the complicated legacy of its ties to the university's past leadership. So it's both a symbol of the leadership of the college and the college itself, but also a symbol of their own private beliefs and private lives. So understanding how that connects to the ways that presidents of the college decided to conduct the affairs throughout their official capacity, as well as their families and what their private life looked like. So trying to elevate the perspectives of the children of presidents at William and Mary and their spouses, and how that might have affected the campus of William and Mary over time. So the president's house is a little bit of a different source than the other buildings because it's not named after a specific person. It's more about the legacy of the institution and how the building itself has served as a symbol at William and Mary.
Thank you, Cecilia. Next up, we have Fatimata Suzuku talking about the Monroe statue.
Hi, my name is Fatimata. I'm a sophomore majoring in Africana Studies and Government. So I started this research process back in September when I first joined CCL&I, and I was interested in researching Monroe specifically because of his legacy intertwined with the practice of slavery. I use sources from James Monroe's Highland, which is Monroe's former plantation and now museum. It is currently owned and operated by William and Mary. I started my research by first looking at the conditions that led to William and Mary erecting a statue in his likeness. The Monroe statue was erected outside of Tucker Hall in 2015 by Carol and Patty Owens, two William and Mary alumni, as a gift from the class of 1962. And I was curious as to why the statue of Monroe was constructed, especially so recently, and relied on information from those who spearheaded its construction. Carol Owens, one of the benefactors of the statue, quoted as saying, the statue will serve as a reminder to current and future generations that he was a bold leader with strong educational roots in the university, whose policies continue to make a meaningful impact on populations in the US and around the world. And then the president of the time, Taylor Reevely, speaking about the statue, James Monroe was an early national leader of compelling ability and accomplishment who has been somewhat lost to history, even to his own alma mater. We are about to remedy this lapse on our own campus with a magnificent new statue of President Monroe. The statue will speak to the importance of this alumnus to the United States, the international order, and William and Mary. So to sort of get into James Monroe's life, he's notably known for his role as the 5th president of the United States. He was born in Virginia in 1758 and attended William and Mary at the age of 16 and left to then join the Revolutionary War, where he became a decorated war hero. After the war, Monroe studied law and his political career began, during which he held positions in the House of Delegates, Congress, and the Senate, and served as the Secretary of State, Governor of Virginia, and President of the United States. Monroe was known for resolving longstanding issues between the US and Britain, creating the infamous Monroe Doctrine, negotiating the Louisiana Purchase, and expanding territory from Spain. Monroe's time in the office of presidency was known as the era of good feelings. After he served his 2 terms as president, he retired and returned to Oak Hill, his plantation in Northern Virginia, participated in politics as the president of the Constitutional Convention. And on July 4th, 1938, James Monroe passed away and is now buried in Richmond, Virginia. So James Monroe's life, though it's celebrated by the public for his accomplishments in the ushering of a new nation, is pervaded with injustice and hypocrisy. In 1793, Monroe became a large-scale landowner, purchasing 1,000 acres of land he called Highland, neighboring like Jefferson's plantation in Charlottesville, Virginia. And although the ownership of Highland did not lie under Monroe's care the whole time, Highland used enslaved labor, Monroe created the brutal conditions of slavery that continued after he was forced to forego the property in 1826 due to outstanding debts. Highland is currently owned by William and Mary, and we actually visited it in November when we we discussed Highland's care under William and Mary and the complicated history it maintains as both a museum and a venue site. In addition to Highland, Monroe maintained ownership of another plantation called Oak Hill, located in Loudoun County, Virginia. And in 1794, Monroe and his uncle purchased the Oak Hill plantation and 1,400 and 400 acres that it accompanied. Following his uncle's death, Monroe became the sole owner of the property. Monroe enslaved over 250 individuals, marring their lives with subjugation and unimaginable brutality that is inherent in the lives of those enslaved. And though Monroe declared himself against slavery, calling it one of the evils still remaining, he maintained the conditions of the people he enslaved, even in his death, where he freed only one manservant. Monroe saw the freedom of those enslaved to be problematic because once freed, Black people would become, quote, a public burden, where they considered part of society, disrupting the social order. Instead, Monroe supported colonization efforts, advocating for the government to relocate freed Black people to Africa. Monroe, as acting governor, also saw the hanging of those accused of involvement in Gabriel's rebellion. Monroe executed the leader Gabriel and his 25 followers, who planned a revolt with the intention of ending slavery in Virginia. This marks yet another hypocrisy in Monroe's character. Monroe was a man whose life was distinguished by heroic achievements during both the Revolutionary War and after. As leader of a new nation born from the subjugation of their mother colony, Monroe understood the struggle for freedom under a colonial oppressor. When confronted by men who desired freedom in the same vein that Monroe once gained his own, he instead approved of the execution of 26 men seeking liberation from an oppressive system. Monroe also saw the removal of indigenous peoples. I'm sorry, I have a fire drill.
Thank you, Fatimata. We will move on to our next person. So I want to invite Alex Daniels to talk about their work with the Tyler Garden.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. Thanks for coming out tonight. This work is really important to us. My work focuses on the Tyler Garden. That's an area right next to James Blair Hall, sort of off to the west side. As you can see in this picture here, there are 3 separate busts. They depict in order John Tyler Sr., John Tyler, who you probably know better as President Tyler, and then Lyon Gardner Tyler, who is president of the college. The reason I decided to work on the Tyler Garden, I'm a history major, and the history department actually used to be named after Lyon Gardner Tyler. During a bunch of the sort of conversations around renaming, it was actually renamed to the Harrison Ruffin Department of History, which we see, as sort of a step in the right direction, but it still behooves us, to talk about the history of these figures depicted in the garden. I also want to mention that I work as a student assistant within Swim Special Collections. I'll try to link a couple of things in the chat here, just because we have a lot of the Tyler's information digitized, and a lot of their history can be kind of bullet point, dry factual. So I want to focus on some of the, I guess, more interpretive stuff. So let's talk first about John Tyler Sr. Tyler Sr. was, notes. All right, sorry about that. So John Tyler Sr. Was born on the Greenway Plantation, that's in Charles City County, and he studied law at William & Mary. After studying law, he then established his own private practice and then would go on to have a pretty in-depth career within the Virginia political system and then the federal political system. Greenway, I only have a couple of statistics from Greenway, but I know at the 1787 census that Greenway enslaved around 34 people, 20 adult people and 14 children. John Tyler, the president, was also born and raised on Greenway and then would go to William & Mary for preparatory school and then college and then law. He also had a very successful political career, as I'm sure you know. One thing I'd like to highlight about their political career, the connection between their political career, the connection between their political career and their enslavement of individuals. I'm going to look something in the chat here real quick. This is a letter between John Tyler and one of his sons, who is also commemorated just on the plinth under him. This letter discusses his education at the school, and it also discusses some matters at the plantation back home. This would have been at Sherwood, which is the plantation Tyler later purchased and moved the family to. What you notice here is discussing his son Robert's education. One of the main figures here discussed is Mr. Dew. Professor Dew was a pretty virulently racist professor at the College of William and Mary. So you sort of understand where these people are getting their ideas and their education from. Also, sort of content warning for this. Next source, there's a discussion of treatment of enslaved individuals. So I just want to go ahead and give that content warning. I'm really sorry, my internet is moving so slowly today. All right, well, I will just let that do its thing. I'll just go ahead and link to the Tyler Family's paper project instead. You guys can definitely peruse at your leisure. I don't want to take up too much of my other researchers' time. The last figure I want to touch on here is Lang Gardner Tyler. Gardner Tyler was the 17th president of William and Mary. He was elected in 1888 during one of the college's many sort of times of financial ruin. The more you look into William and Mary history, the more you see that that's kind of a theme, is that the college will be plunged into kind of bankruptcy and dire financial straits, and then they will have some sort of monumental larger-than-life figure come to scoop them out of it, sort of like Abby mentioned earlier with Mr. Ewell. Lang Gardner is credited with a lot at William and Mary. He is supposedly, in addition to saving the college from bankruptcy, he was a very well-loved professor of history, hence the naming of the history department after him. He established the William and Mary Quarterly, which is still in publication today. And then he did a lot of legwork in hiring professors to sort of revitalize the college. Many of them had left at this point. But sort of like Professor Dew, Lang Gardner had some kind of controversial views, at least as we would consider them today. This is a Confederate catechism, his response to what he calls the War of 1861 to 1865, or as we know, the Civil War. Linking these documents, I hope you get a chance to view them. I feel like they contextualize these individuals better than I can in just 3 or 5 minutes, but I hope this gives you guys a good starting point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for bringing those documents to our attention. We have 2 more student presenters. Next up, we have Annabelle Midden talking about Jefferson Hall.
Hi, my name is Annabelle Midden, and I am a sophomore history and religious studies double major. I've been researching Jefferson Hall, a student dorm built in 1921, named after William and Mary's famous alum, Thomas Jefferson, class of 1762, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to imagine, class of 1762. Not coincidentally, Jefferson Hall is also my current home. This is Jefferson Hall. I'm in it, and in a lounge in it, and making a lot of this research very immediate for me. I mostly focused on first the history of the building itself, and then Thomas Jefferson's letters and writings to get his perspectives and some nuance on the events of his life, which are very, very well known in the United States. To begin, Jefferson Hall was built in 1921 specifically for use as all-woman housing to accommodate the new co-eds who were admitted during World War I in a last-ditch effort to save the school. Essentially, all the men had enlisted, so President Lyon G. Tyler petitioned to allow white women to enroll, bringing in more tuition money and federal funding. Jefferson Hall housed the first original class of 24 women during their senior year. Decades later, in 1965, Jefferson Hall made history again when Lynn Briley, Janet Brown Strafer, and Karen Eli, the first African American women and the first African American students of any gender to live on campus, moved into Jefferson Hall as freshmen. Today, the three women are commemorated in plaques and artwork in Jefferson Hall, in Swem Library, and on the porch of the Wren Building. If anybody is interested, you are all welcome to go see that. In 1983, the West Wing, the wing I'm in currently, of the building burnt down and was rebuilt by 1855. The fire was very jarring for students, and at least for people who live in Jefferson Hall, still is. If you're interested, there's a more detailed account of the hall's history on our website. But for now, I'm going to focus on Thomas Jefferson himself and whether his name is frankly fitting for a dorm with the history that it has. Thomas Jefferson graduated from William and Mary in 1762 as a young idealistic man who went on to lead a proliferate political life. Over his lifetime, he was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses, participated in 2 constitutional conventions, served on the Virginia House of Delegates, served as the governor of Virginia, retired briefly, re-entered public life as an American diplomat in France in 1785, served as Secretary of State under George Washington, then as Vice President under John Adams, and was finally elected to the presidency after years of political maneuvering from 1801 to 1808. During his presidency, Jefferson negotiated and authorized the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon Bonaparte in 1803, expanding the United States borders beyond any previous imaginings. His choice marked the beginning of American imperialism and the United States' choice to follow in Europe's footsteps. It set the precedent for Manifest Destiny and the Homestead Act, post-Jefferson policies which displaced almost all Western Native American nations and led to years of bloody warfare. Jefferson's actions in his political and domestic life, such as his purchasing of the Louisiana, reflected the colonization of the age. He was not in any way a man ahead of his time. He was very much a man of his time, ascribing to Enlightenment ideals without any serious scrutiny of race, slavery, or European gender norms. He did, especially when he was younger, declare slavery as immoral, and in his sole book, Notes on the State of Virginia, which I valiantly tried to read all of, but admit that I skimmed during the exhausted lists of native Virginian flora and fauna. In this book, it covers his plan for slavery. Jefferson believed that slavery would be abolished by 1800 and thought America would be best without free Black people. As a slave owner who owned 600 people throughout his lifetime and had roughly 100 enslaved people living on Monticello at any one time, Jefferson knew slavery firsthand and regarded the possibility of free Black people as a ticking time bomb, famously saying slavery was a wolf held by one ear which can neither be held nor safely let go. He wrote a plan wherein all Black people, many of whom were removed from their African ancestors by several generations, would be sent to Africa to live in the colony of Liberia. It is up for debate whether this deported population would include his own children with Sally Hemings, the enslaved half-sister of Jefferson's deceased wife, with whom Jefferson had 4 living Black children. She was 14 to Jefferson's 44 and isolated from her mother in France when he began pursuing her. Their relationship may have lasted for the rest of his life, as he never remarried and had children with Hemings for all 20 of her childbearing years. There is no version of Jefferson's biography where the famous, infallible author of the Declaration of Independence didn't groom a young Black girl whose life he had complete control over. Jefferson was a man. He was a very fallible man who has been made infallible over time, and any analysis of Jefferson's life today is forced to contend with the public's heroic image of him, an image which is very personal for many, especially among predominantly white conservative Americans. To defame Jefferson is to essentially defame America in their eyes. It inspires a fierce defensiveness very quickly in many Americans. He and the other founding fathers are not men in this kind of idea. They are saint-like figures, models for our whole government system, and any interrogation of them or their actions is tantamount to questioning the Constitution. But Jefferson was not as intentional as we make him out to be. He did not think he would be so scrutinized until later in his life, and his actions show that. He never made any real political moves to abolish slavery, even though he at many points had opportunities because he would not risk his political career or his only income source. He bought the Louisiana and enabled the wars which displaced and nearly eradicated many Western First Nations, but to an extent, his choices have been assigned intent where there may have been passiveness, and passiveness where there may have been intent. So how much purpose can we give him? How much grace does he deserve? How could his personal achievements, which were born from an education available to him only because of slavery, be equal to the lives of the 600 people he owned over the course of his life? How do we heal the dissonance between the public's modern image of their demigod and the real man? William and Mary named Jefferson Hall after this man to honor his accomplishments while also connecting themselves with his fame. They are careful to number him among William and Mary alumni, as they do with many statesmen slaveholders who graduated from this school, and he remains a referenced presence on campus. He has reached a godlike status in American mythology. His every move in shaping America, as well as the choices of other founding fathers, is given a level of intention which sanctifies the Constitution even 235 years later. But granting infallibility to these men, including Thomas Jefferson, is dangerous and gives him far too much credit. He was just a person.
Thank you, Annabelle. Last but not least, we have Lumen Edmonds to talk about Washington Hall.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I'm Lumen. I'm a sophomore studying international relations and environmental policy, and this is my first semester in CCL&I. So today I'll be presenting the extent of the research I've been able to do so far. Over the past few months, Washington Hall has transformed into something of a second home for me. I've spent a lot of time in the archaeology lab assisting a PhD student in the anthropology department. And I've noticed that on any given day, students file into the building to study everything from modern language to archaeology, but George Washington himself doesn't play much of a role in students' time in the building. And in fact, the role he plays in William and Mary's history as an institution as a whole is still rather unclear even after I've done my research. So I began my research with a trip to special collections at SWEM, and in the 2 hours I spent there, I was able to find one document mentioning Washington. It explained that he received his surveyor's license from the school in 1749, but beyond that, there wasn't much to work with. He served as the first American chancellor to the college, rather reluctantly. He is quoted as having described the buildings as rude, misshapen piles, but they have roofs, would be taken for brick kilns. So he wasn't very fond of the school, yet he remains a beloved figure for his time as a surveyor and, of course, later as commander-in-chief and president. So in 1929, Washington Hall was constructed and officially dedicated to him. So because of Washington's prominence in history, I have been fortunate enough to access primary and secondary sources that have helped inform the life he lived. This history is, however, tainted by his position as a slave owner. At the age of 11, Washington inherited slaves, and he oversaw more than 500 bondaged workers throughout his lifetime. Slaves built and maintained the property at Mount Vernon. To maintain his unfaltering image as someone who worked for the common welfare of the Union, he avoided speaking out in opposition to slavery. He ordered his slaves' freedom following his wife's death, but this applied to less than half of the individuals enslaved. And though he was notably the only founding father to call for the release of any enslaved men in his will, upon his death, some 317 men and women remained in bondage on his estate. And during his time as general of the Continental Army, Washington made a promise to the 6 Iroquois tribal nations that their land rights would not be infringed. However, in fighting for the independence of his nation, these 6 tribal nations effectively lost their own sovereignty. And as a result, Washington and every US president since have been referred to as town destroyers by the Onondaga people of New York. So having done this research, I wanted to gain a better understanding of the William and Mary community's current impression of the figure who stands behind Washington Hall. And I have reached out to a few students who spend most of their time in the building. One anthropology student told me, "I don't really associate the name Washington Hall with George Washington. They seem like separate entities entirely." And she added that her professors in Washington Hall have had comparatively profound impacts on her experience as a student and as an anthropology major here at William and Mary. So the question of why the hall is named after George Washington, someone who has had such little impact on the college and even more significantly contributed to the nation's slaveholding legacy, thus still remains. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our student presenters for giving us insight into the incredible research and work that you all have done this year. I want to invite our audience again, if you have any questions, to please either raise your hand or type them into the chat. We have about 5 or so minutes to address any questions. I do have one for the committee. I'm interested in knowing whether you all have received any pushback in starting this group or what the reception has been like. Do students on campus know that the group is happening? Have people had concerns or comments or opinions about it? Is that something you feel like you all have faced in doing this work?
I know that people I talk to don't necessarily know that CCL&I exists. But when I tell them, like, they're pretty receptive. But I know that I'm pretty sure Abby and L'Oreal received like an email that wasn't super nice, or really wanted us to continue with our research, for a lot of the reasons that Annabelle's talking about, like, oh, these are great people, like, how dare you sully their name. But I think that, I mean, Abby and L'Oreal can speak to this more, but I think that's the only thing that we've received that was like openly negative.
Yeah, for the most part, people have been really, really supportive. Like everyone we've reached out to, people at special collections, different professors. The Lemon Project has been really, really helpful to us. We are nervous about this is our first like big public appearance as a committee because we haven't launched the QR codes yet. So we're nervous about the future, but as of right now, people have been very, very supportive for the most part.
So you mentioned,
just to add, sorry.
Keep going, Alex.
I think one thing that might be helpful for everybody to know, most, if not all, of the statues on campus, not the portraits, but the statues, I don't think any of them are older than 1995. 1995, I believe, it's either the Jefferson statue or it's the law school statue. Let me pull up my notes here. But the point being that a lot of these, being so recent, aren't exactly entrenched in the sort of like, alumni college mind, if that makes sense, as I think it might appear. So in contrast to how long the college's history is itself, I think that's something important to keep in mind.
That's a fantastic point. So Abby, you mentioned talk about the future. What are the ultimate goals of the CCL&I? Where do you see this committee going?
When Shane first envisioned this committee, he said to us, like, this is a years-long project. So that's part of the reason why it was really important for me to work with L'Oreal, because she'll be here next year. Like, this isn't something that we're going to just do for 1 year, because the campus is huge, and he envisioned us contextualizing every single building and site on campus, so both new campus and old campus. Our short-term goal is we want to get these QR codes launched, and we want to do a living museum. Long-term, it's finding a way to contextualize every single building on this campus. And that means continuing the committee year after year after year.
So we've had a few comments in the chat about sort of names or figures that you might also look into. Does the committee have have a list of names? How do you plan to continue with your research?
Yes, so we actually do have a list, a full list comprised of contextualizing every building, every name on campus. We just didn't have enough researchers to cover everyone this semester, but we will be getting to it, like we said, throughout the years. Next year, we'll have a whole new section that we'll be looking into and getting that research out there to everyone.
That's fantastic. So I want to be mindful of the time. For everyone here, how can people get involved and support your work, whether or not they're undergrads on campus? Is there a way that they can support you? And how can we sort of spread the word about the work that you all are doing?
I would say follow us on social media and contact us via our email if you'd like to be involved in any sort of way, especially students. We need as many students as possible on the committee. So I'll put our email and our Instagram in the chat, and those are both ways to reach out to us.
Well, on that note, I want to thank everyone so much for coming out to hear about this work. I think it's been absolutely fantastic watching this group of students make the tremendous efforts and strides they've done in just a year. And as a reminder, this is work that they're doing on top of their regular course loads, right? They're choosing to do all of this additional research. And I think it's just been tremendous. So I want to thank all of our students for doing the work that you're doing and for our audience for coming to hear about it tonight. Please contact them, follow them on social media, and thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good rest of your night.